Hello everyone, I am CoolGuy, and today I would like to go over a couple things that I believe are going to be very important to the overall health of Destiny 2. But first, with his permission, the background footage that you're seeing is from Mesa Sean when he was at the Destiny 2 reveal event. And thank you, Mesa, for allowing me to use this footage. And if you guys see him out there on a patrol or something, tell him CoolGuy said thank you. And the things that we're going to be discussing today are going to be out of love. I'm very passionate about Destiny, and more than anything, I want this game to be successful like many of you. So there are a couple of things that happen in Destiny 1 that needs to be looked at more carefully, and I'm sure that Bungie knows this, and I've talked about it in the past, but now's a really good time to start talking about it and all of it with you guys from start to finish and why it can't happen anymore. Now the first thing is completely separating PVE and PVP, and I'm not sure how hard that is. I have no idea what goes on in the game designer code, but as a player playing the game, the PvP community cannot dictate the direction of Destiny anymore. Weapon balance and mechanics of subclasses were nerfed and buffed to the liking and catered to the PvP community, and that went on over into PvE. Simply can't happen anymore. And I think that that severely hurt the game, because when Destiny first came out, I thought of the Crucible as a secondary place to go. After finding awesome loot in PvE, you can go and try that out in the Crucible, see how you liked it. But of course, the Crucible turned into something completely different, and we know that now. But I did some digging back way in 2014, looking at the infancy of Destiny, and I remember that the Suros regime and auto rifles, they were the kings, and they absolutely were, along with fusion rifles. And I also remember what patch 1.1.1 said, but I went back and looked at it exactly, and going back, here's what happened with sandbox designer John Wisniewski. Going on balance on auto rifles, a graph of usage in the Iron Banner was shown, and at the bottom it says, quote, "That's not just Suros. If you look at the top 10 lethal weapons over a period of 30 days, 6 of them are auto rifles." And yeah, this is Iron Banner, guys. Weapons like the Shenzhen, Sidonia, and Galahad were in there in the top 10 blue-green weapons. It's crazy. So they looked at that, and also fusion rifles got a nerf. But after these nerfs, these weapons were never the same, and it took a long time, years, like up to now, before they get some sort of standard of usage. But looking back at this patch, I started looking to see what players were saying on random forum posts way back in 2014. Like, I went back to 2014 Bungie forum posts. Like, one player said, "Hey, they nerfed the Suros on the PvE side instead of PvP, like even though it was supposed to be for PvP. Then another one said, "My shadow price with range upgrades can't drop an elite past 20 meters in a full magazine, yet the Suros regime is still breaking PvP. Like, why? Like, what's the issue here?" So auto rifles were strong. They were the most deadly weapons in the game. They got nerfed on February 25th, 2015. 1.1.1 showed a couple things to me. Number one, well, they said, quote, "Looking at raw DPS, the auto rifle is the most lethal primary weapon class across all of Destiny's activities." So the graph showed that. They went to PvE and PvP. Their numbers were showing that ARs were dominantly used, but the nerf, however, I feel was pushed from that PvP side, mostly from the Suros regime. Because in the early days of Destiny, I don't think anybody was asking for a nerf to Suros in PvE, because it was awesome. It had super good stability, it had high caliber rounds, huge damage at the end of the magazine, it healed you from time to time. It was strong in its own right, it had its own little place in PvE. But then all of a sudden, auto rifles didn't work properly, all of them in PvE, especially the Suros. But you go through all these balance changes, and what's important to bring up in 1.1.1 from John Wisniewski is that in that first sandbox update, it showed PvE usage. It was showing how auto rifles were affecting the entire game. And from what they were showing with graphs and data, it was trying to warrant the nerf. It's saying, we're going to present this information to the entire player base. It doesn't matter where you go in Destiny. Here is why they are getting a nerf. But moving on, like let's say, did anyone ever use the Hawk Moon in PvE in its glory days? Shots registered, the holding aces perk, doing massive damage to captains? I know I sure don't, because by the time I got it on Xbox One, it was a shell of its former self and nerfed to the ground. And why? Why, you ask? Because of its potency in PvP. I did see some gameplay of it, though, in PvE, and it looked really fun. It also had the Send It perk in the early days. They took that off, ripped the dream, and all you OG guys know what the OG Send It perk meant. But there was also 2 other exotic hand cannons, the Last Word and the Thorn. So we're going to get into another section of keeping PvP and PvE separate, are blanket nerfs. I mean, what exactly is a blanket nerf? A blanket nerf is applied to all weapons that are of the same likeness. So Last Word and Thorn are a hand cannon technically. The Revelator and the Devil You Know are also hand cannon. Do these weapons work the same? No. Are they completely different? Yes. Now, is the Revelator guilty by association? Absolutely. So when hand cannons got a nerf, it should have been one goal in mind, in theory, effective range, which they worked on. And we're at about the midpoint in the video, probably. I want to say this and I stand by it. True balance in the Crucible is going to be achieved through effective range. Effective range is what makes the world go round in PvP, making a gun lethal and not lethal within a set distance. I mean, there was a time when the last word, with its range stat of like 6 or 7 or 2, it would do 60 to the body from the opposite sides of Pantheon. It's competing with pulses and scouts at that range, and it was doing it more efficiently, so effective range needed to be toned down on hand cannons in general. They started focusing on that, which was good, but back then, aside from effective range, was the last word doing 111 to the head randomly and the Thorn 2 tapping people everywhere you looked? And of course Hawkmoon being Hawkmoon, but was the devil you know an actual issue, again aside from the range? The Venation? No. But we got a nerf at some point to hand cannons where the accuracy was taken away, like it kept going further and further. The cone would widen if you would shoot too fast and you would miss your target, but there was also initial accuracy issues. That was affected, meaning you could be like a reasonable 15 meters away, line up your shot right on the head and it would miss, it would just go nowhere. And a real quick note, however you look at it, I feel that missing something that you're clearly aiming at due to something like this is a first-person shooter sin. Especially in a game like Destiny, where the hand cannons were pretty much the only ones doing this inside their effective range. But moving on, I digress. Let's be real. The last word is a novelty PvP weapon. It's a PvP weapon solely. Aside from jokes and challenges in PvE, there weren't full fire teams of 6 going to the Vault of Glass with the last word, or LFG group saying, must have completed new Vault of Glass 90 times, must have last word. No, that's not how it went. So when certain things are an issue in PvP, it can't carry on over because they're for PvP, really. Like, was anyone really complaining about hand cannons in PvE here? I don't think so. So when the nerf happened, it was for PvP, but the PvE hand cannon users also suffered. There was no more using the last word on the Templar. Sorry guys, can't happen anymore. Then take the recent 4.5 meter range nerf to hand cannons. This nerf was 110% for the Ice Luna, the Palindrome, and the Finale Sparrow. 110%. That's all that players would use outside from sometimes the broken and crippled Hawkmoon and last word, but they looked at this and overall Crucible balance, and with this range nerf, wait for it, I hope you're cold and you're shivering, it's a blanket nerf, hashtag Barney Stinson, because with this change, it affected all of them, right? So the Revelator took a hit, a weapon that before the patch was decent and almost found a place. The first curse, the most range out of a hand cannon, hard hitting, it took a nerf reduction. So the PvP community dictated that, it just kind of implemented poorly in my opinion. We take shotguns. Rangefinder and a shotgun, they had the aim down sights time kind of be a little bit slower. So that nerf was 110% for the Matador, Last Ditch, and Party Crasher. But after the patch, my 2 to the Morgue that needed rangefinder, my bad counsel that needed rangefinders to somewhat compete with the Matador, that are nowhere near the lethality of a Matador in the Crucible, they are now nerfed. Just because of 3 other shotguns in the game. So let's round this out with these patches where they've started and where they've ended up. The updates, for the most part, they were PvP driven in the notes, and things like rangefinder, hand cannon range reductions, that carried over into PvE, all in the hopes of a more balanced Crucible. Things like health regeneration on subclasses, that got carried over to PvE. There was a point in time that some guy just opened up the game and Red Death isn't doing its thing. So the last thing I want to point out is the use of that data. So data shows that the Truth rocket launcher was used in PvP heavily. This is an example. Because way back when, Truth was given tripod. At first it had 1, then they gave it tripod inherently. So they took that away again. They gave it 1 rocket, but maxed out its reload. But here's the deal. Overall, an overall game, guys, let's walk through this. Investigation needs to go into that, because while data on paper does show indeed, yes, Truth was the most used rocket launcher in PvP, and they decided to change it, but there was a reason, and that reason was that there was no exotic primary or secondary to warrant usage. We were using Ice Lunas or insert pulse rifle with, let's say, a Matador. There was an exotic that was worthy of being used over these weapons, so by default, people just threw Truth on as an exotic. So Truth always did what it did. Truth was a dependable rocket, and Truth was always there. But let's look at this as a whole. The reason for Truth being nerfed was a spiral effect of nerfs and buffs to other weapons that has an end result of an exotic rocket launcher that's only used once per match being the most viable option for a heavy nerf. That leads to a nerf for something, again, used only 1 time per match across the entire game. The entire game, it's nerfed now. There was a guy out there, I promise you, that isn't as informed as us. He plays Destiny when he can, he loves the game, he mostly sticks to strikes and never really goes into PvP. So he pulled out his Truth one day in a strike on Fogoth and it had 1 rocket. Why should that guy's Truth have 1 rocket? Same could go all the way back to a guy using his new exotic auto rifle this Heroes regime. Think about that for a second. I asked for Bungie to be careful with these things. One section can't have a louder voice than the other, and if something is wrong, fix it in its proper setting. I mean, it's a rough road, and I don't envy Bungie for having to balance Destiny. I mean, bless them for it. That's a hard thing to do. Just look at the game as a whole. There are a lot of things in Destiny. There's a lot that it has to offer. But at some point, something is going to rise in PvE, whether it be a Gallahorn or in PvP, it's a Thorn. It's important to handle those things on a case-to-case basis and not blanket it to everything. So like in Call of Duty Black Ops 3, let's say the KN-44 was a super OP auto rifle. Would you then nerf every single auto rifle in Black Ops 3 because of the KN-44? No. You would look at the KN-44 and try to keep it in line with all the others. Now, Destiny is a special game with special perks and guns, but the basis on that is clear. You keep certain weapon balances to the confines of the Crucible. Now the second thing is a little bit shorter, far shorter, I promise, but it all ties all this together. They need to be a little bit more diligent with updates, because at the end of the day, the game is software, and software updates don't happen every single week. And I know that patches, they take time and money, but I do know that Bungie listens. And I would just like for a problem to be realized after a reasonable data has been acquired, and they go from there and it's fixed. I mean, we hunger for content, and it sounds like that they're gonna be keeping that content flowing with Destiny 2, but a certain issue, let's take the Juggernaut Titan meta, that can't go on for 6 months. It just can't. It's an obvious problem. So maybe like an 8 to 10 window of getting all this together, play the game, and you're gonna see it every single time. You know what, yeah, it might be a little bit broken. We're gonna look into that. But they also need to look into why the Juggernaut meta happened and go from there. And just be a little bit quicker when that stuff happens if they can. There were some things like the pesky Night Stalker tether glitch. It stopped trials in its tracks and certain things for like a couple of weeks. Game-breaking things are handled fairly quickly, and they work to push that patch out to fix them, but overall day-to-day gameplay, things like the Juggernaut Titan, when it starts getting to a point that you need to run that, if not, you're gonna be at a disadvantage, I see that as an issue in my eyes. And again, Bungie does try, y'all. I mean, I don't think a lot of people give Bungie credit. I see them getting a lot of flack. Like, we wanted Sparrow Racing out of thin air. Sparrow Racing League was invented. Just boom, we made maps and we wanted a horde mode, right? Boom, out of nowhere, out of thin air, we have the President of Elders. So Bungie does indeed listen and they know what they're doing, but keep in mind that we've been on this ride with them in Destiny 1. It's a very ambitious game, never been done before. There's no other game like it, and that's why you play it, I promise. Me too. And remember, when these changes come and go, they're learning just like we are, and that's why I decided to make this video, to voice my concerns for Destiny 2, that way that they're paid close attention to. Because I personally feel that these two things really affected the overall health of the game, and I don't want that to happen in Destiny 2, and I'm sure you don't either. So if you liked the video, a little thumbs up is always appreciated, and let me know what you guys think about these two things in the comment section. Also, some things that I didn't cover, things that might be important to you. Thank you for spending a little bit of your day with me, and until the next one, I'm CoolGuy.
You should get to the point where anyone else would quit, and you're not gonna stop there. No, what are you waiting for? Do it! Just do it! Yes, you can!